seems, has stood still. Amelia Blake, a woman in her mid-30s, with a distinctive confidence in her gaze and a noble haughtiness in her demeanor, valuing history much more than passing trends, entered the shop. She scrutinized the dusty shelves lined with ancient books, ceramics, and ornate chests. Suddenly, as if guided by an unseen force, her gaze fell upon a small wooden box nestled in the corner. Amelia slowly retrieved the box from the thickness of dust and shook it, as if hearing ancient secrets sealed within. With caution, she opened the box. Inside were old, yellowed photographs neatly stacked. However, among them, one stood out. Amelia pulled it out and held it before her. The photograph depicted a young woman in an old-fashioned attire, her hand held by a stranger with dark, enigmatic eyes. Experienced with the eyes of a historian, Amelia was captivated by this image. Perhaps it was her grandmother, but who was this mysterious man? She felt that the photograph held a hint of some secret hidden in her family's past. At that moment, she sensed that this stranger was the key to unlocking it. In the evening, when Amelia's husband, Daniel, and their children, Sophia and Mike, gathered in the living room, she presented them with the puzzle of the photograph. They looked at it with interest, and in that moment, their collective immersion into the dark mysteries of the past began. Amelia, look what I found in the antique shop. This photograph was in an old box. Look at this man. He's holding Grandma's hand. Daniel, it's really strange. I've never seen this man before. Sophia, maybe he's some distant relative? Mike, I don't know. He seems mysterious. Why don't we find out who he is? And so, their family investigation began, gradually pulling them into a whirlwind of enigmas and horrors. With each step, they unveiled increasingly eerie details of the past and confronted inexplicable phenomena within their home. Each of them felt that the shadow of this photograph was beginning to haunt them, infiltrating their dreams and their darkest corners. The Blake family finds themselves entangled in the webs of secrets linked to this photograph, and each of them grapples with inner fears and doubts. They realize that in order to save themselves, they must solve this grim puzzle and uncover the mystery of the man in the photograph, even if it means diving into a world where reality and nightmares merge into a singular, terrifying journey. Daniel sat at the table, immersed in reading archival documents that Amelia and Samuel Crane had brought from the local historical society. The room exuded an atmosphere of antiquity, books with cracked pages, dusty maps, and manuscripts seemed to hold the shadows of the past within them. He came across a strange mention of the man from the photograph in the early century newspaper clippings. Victor Graves, a local artist, disappeared without a trace after the night of the exhibition of his final work, the newspaper described. This note was near an article about a certain ritual that had captured Victor's interest. It was the first clue to unraveling the mystery. As Daniel delved deeper into his research, he began to notice strange coincidences. Rain was pouring outside, and the drops tapped against the window pane like mysterious fingers, trying to draw attention to something important. Each time he noticed it, his breath caught, and he felt as if someone was watching him. He stepped out of the house and felt a sensation of being watched. Turning around, he only saw an empty street and wet trees. His heart raced, and he decided to go back inside. Every step felt endlessly long, and he sensed that something was lurking, waiting for him in the shadows. Upon returning home, Daniel saw something shift on his work desk. He approached closer and noticed that an antique book from the archives had moved to the other side. In its ancient pages, he saw magical symbols and strange drawings. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was the book that Victor Graves had mentioned in his journal. Studying the pages, Daniel realized that Victor had attempted a ritual to cross into another realm and come back. However, something went wrong. Darkness engulfed his soul, and he vanished. Daniel felt that Victor was trying to communicate with him, that his soul was trapped between worlds. At that moment, shadows began to slowly move around the room, like mysterious fingers playing on the walls. Daniel felt fear engulf him. He closed the book and looked up, and in the dark corner of the room, he saw a silhouette, a shadow resembling the man from the photograph. "Daniel," an invisible voice whispered, and his heart seemed to freeze. It was Victor's voice, haunting him from the depths of darkness. His eyes held secret knowledge and profound pain. "I tried to come back, but something went wrong." The voice sounded faintly, like an echo from the past. Daniel understood that Victor's shadow was a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He promised to help, to find a way to free his soul, but he knew that it would be a complex and dangerous journey. Sophia sat in her room, enveloped in semi-darkness. Her gaze was fixed on the window, where the rain was falling. In the distance, lightning flickered ominously, as if emphasizing the mysteriousness of the events. Despite her young age, she had always been attuned to the world around her. Since her family began unraveling the mystery of the photograph, something unseen and frightening had started to haunt them. She often felt as though someone was watching her, even when she was alone. Glances from the shadows, rustlings in the night, all of this had turned her reality into a nightmare. What she saw when she closed her eyes was even more terrifying. She saw herself in a long dress, standing in front of a mirror, and beside her was a man with a sinister smile. It was Victor. She saw him running his hand across the surface of the mirror, as if trying to reach out to her, and every time, she would wake up, gasping in terror. Sophia decided to uncover this mystery on her own. She began studying books about paranormal phenomena and occult rituals. Her hands trembled as she read about otherworldly forces and spirit summoning. She understood that if they wanted to save Victor, they needed to take control of the situation. Every night, when she went to bed, she made an attempt to establish contact with Victor. Her eyes closed, and she pictured his silhouette before her. "Victor, I'm here. I want to help," she whispered into the darkness. One day, when she was deeply immersed in her thoughts, she felt something touch her hand. She opened her eyes and saw him. Victor stood before her, gazing into her eyes with his dark, enigmatic gaze. "Sophia," he whispered. His voice was faint, like an echo from the past. "Do you see me?" Sophia nodded, her voice quivering with fear. "Yes, I see you. We want to help you." Victor tried to say something more, but his form began to fade, like a shadow dissipating into the night. Sophia woke up, her heart pounding wildly. She realized that Victor was trapped between worlds, and she had to find a way to free him. Mike, the youngest of the Blake siblings, had always been the one to look toward the future rather than the past. He loved science, technology, and constantly sought explanations for everything around him. However, recent events in the family had caused him to put aside his scientific interests and peer into the darkness of mysteries. The evening in his room was illuminated by the glow of the computer screen. He sat at the desk, manipulating data and delving into the history of Victor Graves. The web pages before him revealed increasingly peculiar details. Mike noticed a faint trail. Several times over the years, Victor Graves left his mark in newspapers and archives, only to vanish afterward. This faint trail, like an angelic thread, led Mike through history. Each new mention was like a puzzle piece fitting into place. He discovered that some of the events surrounding Victor Graves had strange parallels with what was happening in the Blake family now. During his research, Mike noticed that strange, faint lights began to flicker around the house at night. He photographed them and started analyzing the images. The bright spots were unnaturally unnatural, and he suspected they were linked to the same force that was haunting their family. One night, while Mike was fully immersed in his research, he heard a strange rustling outside the window. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then he felt as though someone was standing behind him. His heart skipped a beat. Mike slowly turned around and saw a glowing figure. It was Victor, the same man from the photograph. He was transparent, like a ghost, and his eyes shone with a mysterious light. "Can you see me?" Victor asked, his voice echoing from afar. Mike nodded, hardly believing his eyes. "Yes, I see you. What do you want?" Victor began to tell his story, the story of his love, his passion for art, and his daring ritual that was meant to bring him back from the world of the dead. He had made a mistake, and now his soul remained in the shadows, trapped between two worlds. Mike was struck by his words. He realized that this enigmatic man was more than just a photograph. His story was interwoven with their family's fate. Mike felt a mixture of fear and a desire to help. Emily had always been a woman accustomed to controlling every situation, but recent events had taken her out of her comfort zone. She was faced with a world where reality mingled with nightmares, and the past pulled the present along with it. She felt that her family's fate was closely tied to Victor Graves. She began to delve into old family records, finding mentions of Victor. It turned out that his family had been connected to theirs since the past century. They were distant relatives. From her research, it became clear that their family destinies had intertwined long before the photograph. However, Emily realized that to unravel the mystery, she needed to go even deeper. An idea formed in her mind. She decided to conduct a ritual similar to the one Victor had attempted. She wanted to temporarily travel into the past to understand what had truly happened. The evening was saturated with an atmosphere of enigma. Emily prepared an antique map found along with the photograph. She lit candles, creating a mystical atmosphere, and began reciting ancient incantations found in archives. Her voice trembled, but she persisted. The candlelight began to flicker, and Emily felt something shifting around her. The map slowly lit up with faint lights, as if showing her the way. She closed her eyes and suddenly felt herself descending into a different time, a different space. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in an old hall filled with mirrors and paintings. Everything breathed history. She saw Victor. He stood before a mirror, just like in the photograph. Next to him was a young woman, and Emily realized it was herself. She stood face to face with her own past. She could hear their conversation. Victor was telling her about his aspiration to create a work of art that could unite worlds. She saw him run his hand across the mirror's surface, and a dark portal began to open before them. But in that moment, she felt fear. "Victor, I'm scared," she exclaimed. He turned to her, and in his eyes, Emily saw something dark and frightening. His gaze seemed ominous. He approached her, and she began to step back. The dark portal started to blend reality and nightmares. Emily felt herself losing control, and in that moment, she screamed, releasing her fears into the world. The dark portal collapsed, and she returned to the present. Her heart raced, and she realized what she had understood. Victor had been consumed by the dark side, and her own fears had given him power. She realized that to save Victor, they needed to overcome this darkness within themselves. Samuel had always been the head of the family, but now he felt like control was slipping through his fingers. He was a rationalist, but the events of the past few days had shaken his certainty. Victor's shadow, the mystical lights flickering around the house, all of this had turned his world upside down. He sat in his study, holding Victor Graves' old diary in his hands. His eyes skimmed the pages, where Victor had written his thoughts, fears, and aspirations. In each entry, He saw reflections of his own doubts and struggles. He lifted his gaze and looked out the window. Outside, it was nighttime, and the moon was slowly disappearing behind the clouds. Suddenly, he noticed movement in the yard. A dark figure was slowly approaching the house. Samuel left the study and went out to the backyard. The dark figure stood in the distance, and he could only make out its silhouette. His heart started to race, and he felt a fear he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Who are you?" he shouted into the darkness. The figure began to approach slowly. Then he realized it was Victor, the same man from the photograph. He was transparent, like a ghost, and his eyes shone with a mysterious light. "I am Victor Graves," he whispered, his voice sounding like a gust of wind. Samuel approached closer, the mixture of fear and curiosity compelling him forward. "Why are you haunting our family?" Victor looked at him, and Samuel saw not just darkness, but endless pain in his eyes. "I sought a way to return from the realm of the dead, but something went wrong. Now I am trapped between worlds, and my soul is forever wandering." Samuel began to understand that Victor was not just a threat, but also a victim. He told him about his own research, his attempt to understand what had happened to Victor, and his desire to save his family. "We must find a way to free you," Samuel said, his determination overcoming his fear. Victor smiled weakly. "I have seen you doubt. I have seen you confront your fears. You and your family are the key to my liberation." Samuel realized they couldn't give in to the darkness. They had to find a way to unravel the mystery, come together, and do everything possible to save not only themselves but also Victor. Lillian, the eldest daughter of the Blake family, had always been sensitive and dreamy. She possessed a unique intuition that often helped her see the world through ordinary things. But now, these gifts were leading her to dark secrets. She often spent time in her room, surrounded by her drawings and music. Recently, she had started having strange dreams, filled with symbols and images. She would sketch them, trying to understand their meaning. One day, as she was drawing again, she heard a rustling behind her. She turned around and saw Victor. He stood before her, his form just like the one in her drawing. "You see me," he whispered. Lillian nodded, feeling that his presence was more than just a vision. "Yes, I see. Who are you?" Victor began to tell her about his history, his aspirations, and his mistakes. He showed her his works, his art, and in her eyes, she saw his passionate dedication. She learned that he wasn't just a spirit. He was a living person whose soul was trapped. He asked for her help. He knew she had a gift that could help them bridge the worlds. Her dreams and drawings were the key to solving the mystery, shedding light on the past, and saving his soul. Lillian agreed to help. She began to delve deeper into her dreams, unraveling symbols and riddles. She saw scenes from Victor's past, his art, his fears. She saw the dark portal where he had attempted to unite the worlds. She started to depict their dreams in her drawings, creating paintings that reflected his story. As she drew, she felt something shifting around her. Everything started to come together, the past and the present, the worlds of the living and the dead.